Okay, so we're here with Stefan, our Director of Instruction at MyGuru, and we just wanted to ask him a few questions about standardized testing and how the standardized tests are currently being used, since he's an expert on the topic. So thanks for joining us, Stefan.
My pleasure.
All right, so I just wanted to jump right in. Um, Kind of a broad question, but a lot has changed since COVID with standardized testing and whether they're required or not. I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to some of the trends that you're seeing right now as it relates to schools using or requiring standardized tests.
So last year, we saw the first schools to largely return back to mandatory standardized testing, whether it's the ACT or the SAT, and those were the Ivy League schools. So you saw basically in 2024, schools such as Harvard and Dartmouth and Yale reinstitute test mandatory policies for this upcoming application cycle, so the 2025 application cycle. So that means that students this year may be experiencing more test mandatory policies than had been probably since COVID broke out. And in addition to those private schools, which are largely separate from any sort of larger societal kind of push, you're seeing almost a blue state, red state split amongst test mandatory policies. Most recently, I believe Ohio State said that they are going to reinstate their mandatory testing policies. You've already had that happen at the Florida public schools and the Texas public schools as well. Whereas some of the, and again, this is just the fact of it, more liberally run states, Michigan has maintained its test optional policy. And California, the University of California system actually has gone test blind and has reaffirmed their commitment to being test blind. There are going to be some implications here. But for students, what it really means is that if you want to have the widest possible options for your college application, you're probably going to want to take the ACT or the SAT. It's just impossible right now, especially if you aren't looking at applying this cycle to predict for the next cycle. So if you are yourself a student who is a freshman or a sophomore, it's going to be impossible to know which schools are or are not going to demand a standardized test as part of your application. And even if you're a junior here in 2025, you, as you're investigating schools to apply to in the fall, may not necessarily realize until it's too late whether or not a school does require the ACT or the SAT. So, best advice, take one, because otherwise you're going to limit yourself to schools based on policy, not what you actually want to do or where you want to go.
Yeah, and so I know, we own a tutoring and test prep company, so um, we're possibly a little bit biased, but we also see that I think this is also just a fact that if you have the means, you can spend a lot of money on trying to sort of prepare for a standardized test. And so I think the logic, COVID was a little bit different because everything was really challenging in terms of people being able to get out of the house and find the right resources to even take the test. But I think the general idea in going test optional or not using standardized testing was that they could be biased. And if you had the financial resources, you could really prepare in a way that other students could not. However, I was just, to get to my question, from the perspective of the schools and trying to get a certain applicant pool, what's your sort of personal perspective? Like why do you think there's a strong reason to or to not require or use standardized tests from the perspective of the schools?
So I'll address it from both perspectives. From the school's perspective, Dartmouth, when they reinstated their testing mandatory policy, they actually found that the standardized test helped underrepresented populations, not what people assumed, which was that it hurt them. And I can speak personally as a first generation college student, college graduate, master's degree holder, that the standardized test is a lot easier. There's a lower barrier to improvement than there is in changing high schools or changing extracurricular access. If you are going to choate as a private school student, nothing against you, but you have more options to you than an inner city public school student from the Bronx. It's just the nature of it. And that student from the Bronx isn't going to be able to move to choate. But that student from the Bronx can get access to free preparation materials for the ACT or the SAT and be self motivated to improve. It's also the only aspect of your application that you can improve over a period of weeks or months as opposed to a period of years. So it's an easy scapegoat to look at the standardized tests and go, they are unfair. But in fact, if you look at GPA inflation at private schools is rampant and is something that cannot be leveled in terms of the playing field in any meaningful way. So while you may be correct that it is a bit of a disparity in terms of access to resources for standardized test prep and that sort of thing, sure, but that's not an issue with the standardized test. That's an issue with capitalism.
Yeah. And also, I mean, in my experience, a private tutor can be super helpful. Obviously, we believe that because that's what we provide. But I think in general, people underestimate the extent to which these tests are something with maybe it might take you some more time, but with the work you put in the work, you're going to be able to improve and prepare. And there's a lot of different ways to prepare as well. So,
Well, absolutely. I'll just use an anecdote from working with a student literally yesterday. So the ACT is currently undergoing a huge change, and it's not necessarily been, in my estimation, all that well rolled out or publicized. There are actually going to be, and currently are, as of April 2025, three different versions of the ACT that you could be taking. You could be taking the new updated shortened version where the science is optional, that's online. You can be taking the old version of the ACT with the science mandatory that is also online, but is still in the old format, or you could be taking a pencil and paper format of the exam. And we went, and I was just trying to explain this to the student because it's confusing even to me as somebody who's in this fully. And we were looking at ACT's own materials and publicity materials about why they made the changes. And one of the things just said, the science section is scary. And I looked at that, and yes, I am a cranky old man, but I went, well, just because it's scary doesn't mean you don't do it. And that's part of honestly what I'm seeing as the reasoning against the exams is that they're hard. Okay, do better. I'm
yeah.
sorry, but that's what really pushes you. There's nothing wrong with embracing a challenge and overcoming it. And these exams, they are challenging, but through the work of engaging and overcoming the challenge, not only will you get better at math, will you get better at reading, will you get better at English, you also will develop some soft skills and process skills that are going to be invaluable when you get on campus. I have a newsflash for anybody going to college or going to graduate school. It's going to be hard, and it should be. You can improve, and you'll be better off for it.
Yeah. And I think what you started off by saying, or what I was trying to get at is, and I'll be completely honest, um, I don't come from a particularly challenged background. I've had a lot of opportunity given to me, but I think if we imagine that students that come from a challenging background, they don't have the financial resources that, this idea of standardized testing being a huge part of getting into college as, that's a big barrier that we need to sort of remove. Um, I think you could make a strong argument, almost the exact opposite, that it represents a huge opportunity, one of the only opportunities they're going to get to level the playing field, where it actually doesn't matter how much money you have. It just matters kind of how you do on this exam, and you can prepare for that.
One of the first things that I tell every student I work with is you need to look at this as an opportunity, not an obligation. If you look at it as just a quote unquote stupid test, and I can't tell you how many of the larger purveyors of these test prep tutoring services that I've worked for in the past would openly tell the students it's just a stupid test. That is incredibly self defeating. And I can tell you, having taught these exams for decades now, math is not stupid. English, the language, is not stupid. Unfortunately, people lost sight of why we have these tools societally. Having a better understanding of manual calculation abilities and understanding the basics of statistics such as averages and medians and distribution of exponential growth or decay, those are really helpful for society. Same thing with English. People think that grammar is arbitrary. No, grammar is actually how the language dictates that people of different backgrounds in different locations have a shared method of communication. So, yes, are the standardized tests to a degree arbitrary? Absolutely. It is an abstract application of logic and problem solving using the shared languages of English and of math. But if you learn those languages better, you're going to be better equipped to articulate yourself effectively in the future, whether it's academically, professionally, or otherwise.
So let me ask you, can ask you a question, a bit of a tangential question. So let's say that you're listening to this and you're a student who you're listening to this so far, but you're not convinced. You're just completely panicked and frightened about standardized testing. You want to avoid it. So you found, you know, five schools that are really solid, high quality schools that are sticking to their truly test optional. Like we're not looking at the scores unless you provide them. And it really, and they prompt you. It doesn't matter. If you don't want to submit it, don't. I feel like you're probably going to tell me there's still an argument for taking these tests and submitting them. What would that argument be?
No, I mean, if the student decides that they don't want to go to these schools because of the testing, I'm not going to be able to convince them otherwise. However, I am going to tell them just honestly that running away from challenge is not a way to live life, just my own personal philosophy. So if you're literally looking at it, I went this way because it was easier. I know a lot of people prioritize comfort over everything, but challenge is actually going to make you grow as an individual. That is fully something I believe in. Now, that said, depending on whether those colleges that theoretically posited private or public, the SAT and the ACT are great ways for scholarship and fellowship money to set baselines for being eligible for that kind of resource. So, especially at private schools, there can be alumni or even estates that just set a baseline of I'm being arbitrary here, but 1400 for the SAT. Just saying it has to be a 1400 because that's an easy baseline for whoever is administrating the estate's funds to say this is when we're going to consider giving money to this person. So there's still going to be the possibility that there could be money, especially at private institutions where there, and I don't know, you can see the giant Trojan statue over my left hand shoulder and the national championship winning headline there at USC where I went. There was a bunch of just money from legacy institutions or families that I didn't know at all, but because of my SAT score, I was suddenly told, "Hey, you got over a 1400. You're eligible for this," which is what you're missing out on if you choose to only go to test optional schools because and by extension, not even attempting the exam because you've self-selected out.
Yeah, yeah. I was hoping that's what that you might get into. And I don't know. I even would imagine that maybe you go to a school that's test optional, there might still be scholarships and whatnot tied to those scores. So
More so at the private ones,
yeah,
because that just tends to again be the way that it works. The private institutions tend to, and again, this is just my own personal experience, was that I applied to both USC and UCLA. The public school was theoretically a lot cheaper, but because USC liked my application, and a big part of my application was my SAT score forever ago, I paid less going to USC, which is one of the most expensive private schools in the country, personally, than I would have had I gone to UCLA.
okay. So my final question is related to the sort of this what I find to be annoying and age-old question. So should I take the SAT or the ACT? And I'll tell you what my answer is when people ask me. I really don't have a better answer than I think over time the tests seem to have converged a little bit in terms of what they're testing, whereas in the 20 plus years ago, the SAT seemed to be a little bit more of like a vocabulary test, maybe more of like an IQ test, where the ACT was testing like actual facts and concepts you just learn in high school. Now there may be a little bit both more like that. And then I'll say to people, but it's close, and I don't really have a better answer than I think you should take both. And if for whatever reason your percentile performance is better on one, then you did relatively better. And now like that's, maybe the one to submit, or maybe you want to lean into that one for the second or third time to get even better on it. And that's really my answer. You should probably take both. Do you have a different answer than that?
The major negative to the test optional policies and just the general ambiguity around what should students do in terms of ACT, SAT, all of that has been the biggest negative of the current test optional environment. Students don't know what to do. Should I take the SAT? Should I take the ACT? Right now, as I just said moments ago, there's three versions of the ACT until September 2024 that you could potentially take, depending on your location and the availability of the exam. So, as far as the tests themselves go, the ACT is kind of a black box right now in terms of how it's going to shift and whether the science section is even going to remain a viable section long term because it's being removed from the composite score. They still have the writing that's optional. So now you've got fully 40% of the ACT is optional. The SAT does have a writing section that's exceedingly tertiary as well, but the way that it is, it's going to be incumbent on the students to a degree to be more proactive. And especially as we're in an environment where so much of I have to look at Reddit. I don't like looking at Reddit, but there's this entire uh, like microcosm of this idea of chance me. So just presenting to random people who are anonymous on the internet, do I, with my GPA and my extracurriculars and my SAT or ACT score, have a chance of getting into the University of Miami? These people don't know. You don't know. Why? Try. Stop trying to know what's going to happen in your life before it happens. When it comes to whether it should be the SAT or the ACT, try both. See which one you like. If you like the ACT more, do the ACT. If you like the SAT more, do the SAT. You need to try in order to learn as opposed to just saying, I'm going to listen to this person, including myself. That's the only way that you're going to make sure that your application truly is putting forth the best version of you so that the college wants you. You don't just want the college.
Okay. I'm sure we'll be talking again. Maybe we'll build on this topic. We'll cover some other topics, but I appreciate your
There's
time,
news all
Stefan.
the time with this stuff right now. It's absolutely changing very, very quickly. The ACT obviously has all of their differences. The SAT just updated a bunch of their practice exams in February. There's going to be continued marches with different, just different changes to the tests, changes to the content, changes to the format. The idea of both having now gone digital. The ACT says they're still going to have a paper and pencil. Who knows what it looks like. It's something that is becoming very fragmented, and we'll do our best to try to keep people informed, but really it's going to be a situation and just a circumstance where the more engaged you as a student or a parent are with this process, and we're always available to answer any questions that might be out there. You can certainly comment at this video if you see it. You can reach out to us on our website at myguruedge.com and find us. But that's really what you need to do is ask questions and make sure that you're getting a response from an expert, not just some person on Reddit.
Okay, I agree. Thanks again, Stefan, and thanks for watching and listening.
Yeah, good talking to everybody.
See ya.